Today we're going to talk about section 4.1 in your BJU Press Algebra 2 textbook, and we're going to learn how to solve quadratic equations by factoring. So there's going to be many ways to solve quadratic equations, and the first way we're going to learn is by factoring. So first, let's just talk about what a quadratic equation is. The general form is ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0, where the a and the b and the c, those can be real numbers. The only thing is that a cannot be equal to 0. So anytime that you have an equation whose highest degree term is squared, or a degree of a 2, then you have what's called a quadratic equation. And you can take that quadratic equation and put it into this form. You just set everything equal to 0, so move everything to one side. And so once you have that, we can learn how to solve and solve for x, right? We can solve for x by doing what's called the zero product property. So the zero product property says that if you have two numbers multiplied together, so the product of two numbers is 0, then one of those numbers have to be 0, or they're both 0. So either A is 0, B is 0, or they're both 0, okay? So in order for two things to be multiplied together and equal to 0, then either one of them has to be 0 or they're both having to be 0. And that is how we are going to solve for x in our quadratic equation. We're going to factor first, and then once we have two factors set equal to 0, that means either one of those factors is equal to 0 or they're both equal to 0. So let's see that in action. Example 1 says solve x squared plus 2x minus 24 equals 0. So the first thing we need to do is since we're already set equal to 0, we don't have to move anything. We just need to factor this into two factors. So remember, that is where your box comes into play, okay? So we know that this is supposed to be x squared. We know this is supposed to be negative 24. And we want these two to add up to positive 2x. So this should be x and this should be x because that will give us x squared. So we need two numbers that multiply to negative 24 but add up to 2. So I'm thinking 6 and 4, one of them needs to be negative. Since it's going to be a positive 2x, I'm going to say let's do positive 6 and negative 4. So positive 6 and negative 4, because that will give us 6x and negative 4x, which add up to 2x. So now I have my two factors. I have x plus 6 times x minus 4 equals 0. So remember, our zero product property says that either A, which is x plus 6, is 0, or b, which is x minus 4, is equal to 0. So let's go ahead and state that. Let's say x plus 6 is equal to 0, or x minus 4 has to be equal to 0, because that's what the zero product property says, that if you have two factors, so here's one factor, x plus 6, here's the next factor, x minus 4. If you have two factors multiplied together, then one of them has to be 0 or they're both 0. So now that I have my two factors set to 0, I can solve for x. All right, so I'm going to subtract 6 from both sides. 6 minus 6 is 0, so x is equal to 0 minus 6, which is negative 6. Or I'll add 4 to both sides. Negative 4 plus 4 is 0. So I've got x equals 4. Okay, so here are my two answers. Let's go ahead and try another example. Let us we will solve for 3x squared plus 11x plus 6 equals 0. So again, I'm going to use my box to help me out. Okay, I know I want this to be 3x squared. I know I want this to be 6, and I know I want them to add up to 11x. Okay, so we'll start with the easy part. This can be 3x and this can be x. So I want two numbers that multiply together to get 6. But I need to make sure that whatever this number is here, that I remember to multiply it by 3. And then they need to add up to 11x. So let's try 2 and 3. So x times 2 is 2x, 3x times 3 is 9x, and then 9x plus 2x is 11x, so that works. So that means my two factors are 3x plus 2 and x plus 3. And so that's set equal to 0. So now what I need to do is take my two factors and set them both equal to 0. So either 3x plus 2 equals 0 or x plus 3 equals 0. So again, I'm using my zero product property. So solving for x now, subtract 2. So I have 3x equals negative 2. Divide both sides by 3. So x is equal to negative 2/3, or x is equal to negative 3. Let's try one more example. So again, we are solving quadratic equations by factoring. So we're solving for x in a quadratic equation, which has an x squared, by factoring. So this one is solve 3x squared minus 4x equals 0. So this one is not a trinomial. This one is a binomial. So remember, on a binomial, we don't have to use our box method. We can just factor out our common multiple. And our common multiple here is going to be x. So if I factor out an x, I'm left with 3x minus 4. So I have two factors, right? I have two factors. Here is one factor, and here's the other. So here's A and here's B. So this times this equals 0, okay? So remember, if you have two things together, a product of two things equal to 0, then one of them has to be 0 or they're both 0. So either x is equal to 0 or 3x minus 4 equals 0. So this one's already solved for, so I just have to solve for this. I'll add 4 to both sides. So 3x equals 4, then divide both sides by 3. So x is equal to 4/3. So I get x equals 0 or x equals 4/3. All right, that is all. Go ahead and try some problems on your own.